Do you want to build a multi-seven-figure property portfolio, or step into this two-part series where I get interviewed by James and we break down my $45 million property portfolio, where it all started as a high school dropout to living in a garage, all the way to living a life that many aspire to. I show you the success, the failure, and the stress it took to get to where I am today. This podcast isn't all rainbows and lollipops, so strap in. Hi, my name is Daniel Walsh, and this is the Anchored in Property podcast. And today we're actually going to be doing something a little bit different. I am going to be the one that's getting interviewed, and it's actually James, who heads up strategy for YPYW, that will be doing the interview with me and talking about my property portfolio, my journey, how I got to 45 million, and also some questions that I put up on my Instagram as well. So James, thank you for coming on to the podcast, and I'm going to let you take over the podcast from here and start to grill me.
Beautiful. Listen, thanks for the intro. That was great. Well, listen, I think, Daniel, probably a good place to start with this would be from the very beginning, right? And we're talking right back before you even got your first property. So you're in school. Now, what age were you when you left school?
I left school in year 10. I just turned 16 when I left school. For me, I just never thought I would go to university. So I didn't want to, like, for me, because I wasn't going to go to university, I thought to myself, get out, earn as much money as I possibly could, as early as I could, because I thought I'm not going to earn the money like a lawyer or a doctor or anything like that. Yep. So because I wasn't going to earn huge income, I wanted to try and beat everyone by earning as much income as I possibly could as early as I could. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I left school at 16, jumped straight into work as an auto electrician, which was an apprenticeship 4 years I spent as an auto electrician. I actually worked for my dad for that 4 years before becoming then a train driver after that.
Okay, great. Well, see if we can just sort of rewind a little bit. I mean, here in Australia, like going to university is a big part of, people growing up. A lot of people think that you need to go to university to, do very well financially. Did you make the decision early not to go to university? Was this something you spoke to your family about, or how did you come to that sort of decision?
I think I always knew that I was not the university type. Right. I was always more hands-on type of a person. And I did not like to sit still too long. I didn't like to be in books too long. For me, it was all about, just get out there and do it. I felt like back then I suited more of a tradie sort of lifestyle. So I sort of went that route of more hands-on tradie, go get a skill. One of the big things that I was, always taught was at least get something behind you. So that's when I, completed my trade and become a tradesman before becoming a train driver.
Okay, got it. So where did this all start then? Like, when did you start to study wealth building? Because
very early.
Because ultimately, when someone in your situation, and where you are now, like you started off as a train driver and as a tradesman. Like, where did this all begin?
For me, quite early. I was like, before I even really left school, I was already studying it. So around 15 is when I started studying it. 16 definitely was when I was like more into it. Mm-hmm. And I think because I started work at 16, so everything for me was like brought forward, right? Like, most people don't know what hard work is until they've left school, done university, finally go get a job in their mid-20s.
Yep.
For me, I was 16. I was already working 6 days a week. I was getting, my dad was quite harsh with me, with what I did for work. And so I was working really, really hard. So at 16, I was like, I don't want to do this forever. I want to do something a little bit different, and I want to get into property investing, and I want to do it really early. I had seen my parents, even though they were running a business, it really stuck with me very early on in my life. My dad said to me, I made more money through property than I have through business, meaning that, if you do the right things and you put your money to work hard in the background, then you can do quite well. So I was studying property at 16. I was actually, there was a Sky Business channel basically on TV back then. And there was 2 programs back then with 2 different people talking about property. And they used to talk about property 2 to 3 days a week on there. Mm-hmm. And it was about an hour each. And I would watch every episode. And I had no idea what they were talking about. I was bored. I hated it. And I just thought to myself, you sit here, you listen to it, you learn, and you learn to like it because this is your way to be able to build serious wealth. And that's just because I was instilled that like building serious wealth was through assets.
Understand. Okay. So it was always property then. It was never shares or anything along those lines. You started off with the property. You knew that's the direction you wanted to go from the beginning.
Always property. Mainly for the fact when we were younger, my mum and dad used to flip properties.
Right.
So, I spent a lot of my time, going to open homes, looking at properties, mum and dad buying properties, and then would spend 6 months renovating. So every weekend would renovate properties, would be painting and doing all the carpets.
Yep.
My mum and dad pretty much did everything themselves. So I kind of learned very early that property was something that I was exposed to, that it was something that I could understand. Shares for me back then was just something that was so foreign to anyone around me. I just never had exposure to it. I didn't understand it. And I think, one of the biggest things for building wealth is only do something you understand. So I just went, all in. The biggest thing for me is with property as well is the exposure to leverage. So being able to understand that I could get the debt to be able to increase the returns in property, whereas I couldn't do that in shares. And I learnt the power of leverage very early in life. And that was what really set me to, go to work hard, save money, leverage as hard as I possibly could as early as I could. Because for me, I wanted to be set up by my, mid 20s to late 30s. Like I wanted to do all of my hustling in my 20s so that by the time I got to my 30s, I was enjoying, what I built in my 20s. And then, maybe by sort of like my 40s, I was, doing whatever I wanted.
Right. Okay. So you had a solid plan right from the very beginning.
I was very unique. I was very unique in the way that I knew exactly what I wanted. I knew how many properties. I knew exactly what I was going to do.
Yep.
From the age of 16. And I think the picture just got clearer as the years went on because I started seeing results. So even though I didn't start investing until I was 19, so that was when I bought my first property when I was 19, I was still studying every day between 16 or 15, 16 to 19. So I couldn't actually buy a property, but I was studying it ready to execute for when I could do that. Mainly for the fact is I didn't want to get to 18 or 19, finally have the money to be able to invest and then decide, well, I want something, but I got no idea what I'm doing. And that's what I think a lot of people do. They buy a property, but they buy a property before understanding why they're buying a property or how it actually helps them. Whereas I was the other way around. I wanted to know everything about how to build wealth, why I'm building wealth, what do these properties do for me?
Yeah.
And then that would allow me to then go, okay, I know clearly why I'm buying this property. Because buying property is a result, but understanding why you're buying a property is really the strategy.
Okay. Well, let's rewind to 19 years of age, your first property. Tell us about that. How did you find it? What were the details of the property? How much you purchased it for?
Yeah, so that was a really unique situation. I lived in southwest Sydney in a place called Thirlmere. It was sort of acreage is where I grew up. And my mum and dad had some friends that had just subdivided a block off one of their original houses. And they were looking to sell both of these properties and basically travel around Australia. This property was like half built, but they had kind of ran out of money at that point and they were looking to sell it. Now, this is back in 2011. 2011, the property market was not doing real well.
No.
And we've just come off the tail end of the GFC. People are talking about it could get worse. They're talking about interest rates could go higher. They talked about all these different things. And I just remember it was like a lot of scaremongering. But my parents were like, you just need to buy something if you've got the money. So we went in, I got a loan. I went through all the finance process. I got a loan. They were looking to sell this property. It hadn't been finished. So I got to sort of finish it off myself. And so I bought that property. It was a brand new build, that one, but it was a subdivided property. So it was sort of an infill. All in, it owed me, which crazy to say now, but it owed me about $340,000. That was land and house, 4-bedroom home. And I remember like renting that property out. Back then, when I pretty much bought it, I think I was already up like $100,000 by the time I finished the property. And I'm thinking to myself, like at this stage, well, I was 19 years old. I still was running through my trade at that point. And I was probably only earning like $500 a week, $600 a week at most. So I'm looking at it then and thinking, I just made $100,000 and I just signed a contract and, picked a couple of colors and I was fine and I made all this money. I need to do this 10 times. I can make $1,000,000. So my thought process was just do this again, and exactly what I pretty much did.
And do you still have that property today?
I do. Yeah, never sold it. I've kept it. I paid 340,000 for it all in. It's probably worth 950 to $1,000,000.
That's not bad.
Yeah, so it's done pretty well. Stands on its own 2 feet. It's also helped me buy a lot of other properties. And then from there, I pretty much, funny story, I bought a house. I actually didn't buy the house next door, which was their house as well.
Right.
They sold that for 260 or 280,000, I think it was. And I was like, it's not worth that. It's only worth 260. So I didn't buy it. Should have bought it in hindsight.
Yeah.
But anyway, I bought the house one over again. So I did end up buying a second property, and it was literally one. It was, you could almost, like, there's one house in between it.
Yeah.
Essentially.
I see. Okay. Well, listen, like a lot of the questions, a lot of the people that I speak to, they've either got 1, 2 properties or looking to move in and purchase their first investment property. When I talk to them about their goals, they ultimately usually say they would love 4 to 5 properties, right? So can you talk me through really your journey from the one property? You sort of touched on there in your second one as well, but maybe, your third, your fourth and fifth, what that looked like. Did anything change in your strategy, what your strategy ultimately was, and sort of what period of time frame we're sort of looking at?
So 2011 was the first property that I purchased. I purchased it on pretty high leverage. So I was like 95% leveraged. Put a 5% deposit down. Then I turned around and circled back and bought the second property in 2012.
Right.
And that's because the first property had grown in value. However, I did make a mistake. The mistake was that I cross-securitized my first property with my second property, which I've learned big lessons since to not do that. But I bought my first property. Then I secured it against my second property. It really was the only way to do it anyway. So I bought the second property in 2012. I paid $303,000 for that in 2012. The guy that sold it to me, he paid $310,000 for it in 2008. So he obviously had made no money, went backwards, lost money essentially by the time he got out of it. And then I purchased that property. I had to fix it all up. So I actually renovated that property. So I went in. It was my first renovation experience where I renovated the property. I learned another lesson, which was don't renovate your own properties. Get experts to renovate them, even if it costs more. Do something that doesn't drain your energy where you would want to repeat it. So I spent 3 months renovating this property and worked out it probably ended up costing me more than if I just got someone to help me. That was in 2012. I actually had to take a break for 2 years of investing. And that was because I cross-securitized and I was with CBA, so Commonwealth Bank. They were like hardest back then. They were the hardest for serviceability. So I could not borrow any more money. And the only way I could borrow money is if I took my first property my second property across that had now grown in value, and I was going to take it to another bank, but the banks wouldn't let it go on the leverage. So they basically said, no, we will not let it go. We've cross-securitized it. And pretty much held me ransom to that bank. Whereas in reality, if I hadn't cross-securitized that property, I could have moved one of my properties across to another bank. That was easier for serviceability, and then that would have pushed me even further earlier. So I would have been able to buy something in like 2013. However, I couldn't, so I had to wait till 2014. Now, I'd purchased my first 2 properties in Sydney. Sydney was starting to go off with a bang at that point by 2014, where everything was starting to really jump in prices. I'd seen it through my properties. And at that point, I thought to myself, I can't afford Sydney anymore. I had done a course and I'd spent $8,500 on this course. Back then, which was a lot of money. And like I'm talking, I'm only earning, I don't know, $750 a week or something like that, $700 a week, and I spent $8.5 grand. And I remember telling my family, like, I want to do this course, to learn how to invest in property. Now, they thought they knew everything about investing and all that because they've done investing. I remember they're like, it's a scam, you shouldn't do it. Why would you ever do any course? Just learn yourself, you'll figure it out, that type of thing. And I was like, no, I think it can give me something, and I don't care. It doesn't have to give me everything. It just has to give me something that I will be able to use for the rest of my life, and I'll be able to turn that into a lot more money from what it cost me. So I went and did this course, and it was really about, back then the internet and everything like that wasn't like, there was not as much information. So you didn't know anyone that really invested. It was quite hard to get information. I wanted to learn how to invest outside of my own state. So I wanted to say, well, how do I find opportunities in different states? How do I purchase interstate? How do I finance all this sort of stuff? So I wanted to learn it all. So I went to this course and it taught me how to do all of that. And that's when it sort of opened up for me. I'm like, okay, there's opportunities outside of Sydney that
Yeah.
at the time I couldn't afford. So I found my third house in Brisbane,
Okay.
2014. So
2014. Yep.
paid. So now I've gone back to cheap again. I paid 259,000 for it. That property's still got that. It's worth 900,000. So now I bought that property 2014, and I quickly doubled back and bought another one in Brisbane. I think I paid about 300 for the one after that. So that was my fourth property. So 2011, 2014. Now I've got 4 properties. At the time, though, I still really had nearly a 2-year break, which is why I keep telling people, when you're in it, it feels really slow when you're having a break for 1 or 2 years, but it's just part of the journey. I've gone so far, and yet when I count the years of investing, like I've probably only invested half the years that I could have invested for. So if you're investing, for 20 years, I probably only invested for 10 of those years. And then I really wasn't able to do much for the other 10. I just let the properties compound. I kept increasing my income.
Mhm.
I realized back then that my income was going to hold me back. I was a tradesman at that point, but I wasn't earning a lot of money.
Yeah.
So I decided to go from auto electrician tradesman on $750 a week to a train driver. I've never been in the train world at all. I didn't even know it existed as a job as driving trains. I just never even thought about it.
Yeah.
I applied for this job and they turned around, and 6 months later, I got this random phone call. My dad was answering it while we were at work, and he's like, you got a phone call, some train mob or something like that. Anyway, they're like, come in for an interview. And we did all the interviews and everything like that. And I got the job. It was 10,000 applicants and 7 or 8 of us got it.
Wow.
So I got that. And then I had to tell my dad, I'm sorry, I'm no longer going to be doing this.
Yeah.
He was relieved. He didn't want me to do what he was doing. He said, I can't see a future in what we do, and I don't think you'll earn good money in it anyway. It's not a great industry. So he pushed me to go. I started training. I was on $750 a week just in the training world. I remember coming home to my dad. I'm like, Dad, you pay me $750, and I spent 4.5 years doing this, and I'm getting $750. I didn't even know what a train does, and I've done nothing, So I was like, literally, like, they're showing us how it all works, and I'm like, I'm gonna pay $750 just to sit in the classroom. So I was pretty stoked that I was sort of getting that type of money. And then I spent the next sort of 2 years becoming a train driver. And then, just sort of pumped it out doing that as my career for the next sort of 8 years.
Gotcha. Okay. So within those purchases of property number 1 to property number 5, what do you think was the biggest mistake that you made? Was it the cross-securitizing the property? That was definitely it?
That was my mistake, because that's what held me back from buying that 1 or 2 extra properties. As you can see me explaining some of those growth rates, an extra 1 or 2 properties. If I had bought them in, say, 2013, I could have backed up another 1 or 2 properties because I was getting the equity at that point. I would have been able to, even 1 extra property by now, probably up another $700,000 or $800,000 by now just by holding that property. Even if it was just a cheapie back then.
Yep.
And the only thing that really stopped me was the choice of structure in the way that I financed it. And that's when I really learned, okay, financing is the game. Property is the final destination. It's like, that's what you do after you understand how to finance and structure. But if you get your finance and structure wrong, it could cost you millions of dollars in the end if you are wanting to, push your wealth building game to the absolute limit.
That's right. It's a financial play, right? We're just using property to ultimately get there.
Yeah, exactly. To be honest, I don't care about property. I care about what it does for me. I don't care where the property's located. I don't care whether I've bought in suburbs I would never live in. I've bought in areas and states that I would never want to even go to, but I buy them because they are there to serve a purpose for the things that I do want to do in life. and I want to be able to retire. I want to be able to have a good life. I want to be able to have passive income. And if that's going to get me to that journey and get me to the end goal, I don't care where it is and what it's doing. I just care that it's going to get me there.
Did you have any fears in the early days with investing? If those, from 1 to 5 properties, what was sort of going through your head? What was?
I think that my biggest fear was at the point I owned the most properties that I knew out of anyone, right? So like at that point I'm young.
And how old were you?
Well, I would have been 2014, early 20s, 22,
Wow.
23, like something like that. Yeah, about 23. But I mean, most people had one, or like my mum and dad probably only had their own home and maybe one investment at that point. Because they will always sort of cycle through and flip.
Sure.
So they never held lots of property. They sort of like got rid of it, got the next one, got rid of it. So they never held a lot of exposure. So once I got to like my 4th and 5th property, I remember, everyone sort of sit me down and like, hey, you're going a little too far with this, you're going to get yourself into trouble.
Like an intervention.
Yeah, you don't understand what could happen. And I was just like, with respect, like I've studied this every single day for hours for so long that, I know what I'm doing. And I don't think I got the respect until I could show them the results. So there was many years where I had to believe in myself and do what I believed at that time was the best thing for me, and shut out the noise from people saying like, you're just going too far, you shouldn't be taking debt on, things could change, crashes could happen, all that sort of stuff, and say, you know what, no one's studied like you have. This is what you're doing. You know what you're doing and they don't. Stop listening to them. And that was probably the biggest challenge I had early on, was not buying the property. It was the mental challenge of uncharted waters, and everyone was telling me don't go in there. And I was just thinking like, I need to do that for myself. And I was watching these people on these shows, these hosts on the show, and they had multiple $1 million portfolios, $10, $15 million portfolios. Back in those days was quite a bit. And I'm thinking, I don't know who they are, but they've done it, and I'm using their principles and their philosophies and their training to be able to do it for myself. Do I listen to them? Or do I listen to my family? And for a lot of people, they listen to their family because it's the emotional attachment, like they're doing the best for you. But for me, it was like, they just don't have what I want, right? And this guy and this lady does. Like, they've got what I want, so I'm going that path. And I always felt that because I was so young, that I had so many years to make it work, that even if I stuffed something up, I could wait 10 years. It wasn't going to be a huge deal. One of my big things that I had when I was early, so whenever I sort of got worried about buying a property, I used to always say to myself, do I believe this property will be worth more in 15 years time? And as soon as I answered that with yes, I buy the property and I don't think about it again. And the reason for that is people try to think short term, 1, 2, 3 years. They're thinking, what will the economy do? They're thinking up, down, crash, boom, how can I make the most money? But the game of wealth is long term, and if you make it short term, great. But if you play in the long term, you will make long term moves. So therefore, you won't get shaken out of short term volatility. So when everything was happening in 2010 and 11, I started studying property in 2008. Everyone's like, why would you study property? We're in a recession.
Yeah,
and I'm like, because I know the game will be that this is just a blip on the system and it's going to go back up again. So why would I not be? I, to be honest, wished I was could have invested in 2008, because I would have made even more money. So I've always sort of flipped it around and said to myself that if there's a downturn, there's more opportunity, and if there is a boom, it just means I'm going to get money quicker. So I'm either going to get money quicker, or I'm going to get more money in the end, because I'm going to get more opportunity. So some people look at it as it's either positive or a negative. I just look at it as it's a positive or a double positive, essentially.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I think, what I took from that, which was really important, is, a lot of times when you're making a big decision like this, you want to talk to your family about it, but ultimately it's like, unless they've been where you want to go, like, is their advice something that you want to lean into?
I stopped telling my family what I was doing.
Yeah.
Because what people don't realize is subconsciously what somebody says to you sticks, right? If somebody says to you something enough, your subconscious believes it, even if it's not true. So if I was validating some of my questions with friends or family that were going to give me the wrong answers, and I subconsciously program my mind that they were the correct answers, I would then start to be defensive in terms of the way that I played my game of building wealth.
Yeah.
I was very aggressive in the way that I built wealth, and I did it from a very calculated, sort of position. But at the same time, I think if I kept going down the path of asking everyone about like what did they think, then I would have probably not gotten as far, because I would have started listening to them because what they said was louder than what I was telling myself. So I had to be my own beacon of light of saying that this is the direction you're going. You hammer that direction, and just remember you're the one that put in the work to be able to get the outcome. And people don't realize, like, people don't know how far you're willing to go to get something, right? So, somebody else might say, out of fear that you shouldn't be doing this, you shouldn't buy 5 properties. It's like, well, why? Because they don't want to have that much debt. But that doesn't mean that they should be putting that onto you as your belief, because your belief might be, well, I want that much debt because I know what it can do for me and I know how it can work. So you got to be careful that you don't adopt other people's beliefs as your beliefs. And then all of a sudden now your identity is made up of other surrounding people's beliefs. And the problem is, if the beliefs around you are wrong or they're not where you want to be, guess what? You're going to be exactly the same person.
Yeah.
I grew up in an area where, unfortunately, I was not, listening to really wealthy people. So I wasn't getting really good answers. I was getting scared answers. I was getting feared answers. And unfortunately, that's the reason why most of the people live there, because they were always playing defensively.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I think that's really powerful.
If you're already on your property investing journey or you are considering it, then YPYW specializes in building high performance property portfolios backed by in-house research. We've helped clients create portfolios worth over $10 million, helping you exit the rat race. So just visit ypyw.com.au.
So, Daniel, you've just turned 35.
Yeah.
Just turned 35. You've got a $45 million property portfolio, soon to be $50 million. Did you think that you would get here at this age? Or did it sort of sneak up on you and you're sort of a bit surprised about
I
it?
don't think I ever thought I was going to get to 50 million, to be honest, or 45 to 50 million. No. I was always, because I think back in the day, no one had big portfolios over sort of 10 or 15 million, right? So 50 million would be just ridiculous number that no one had achieved 10 years ago. So, for me, it was like, my ultimate goal was like, could I get to 10 million? 10 million was like a life goal, right? And, for me to see where I'm at now at 35, I definitely feel like in my early days, I felt like I wasn't going quick enough. And now I feel like it's all happened very rapid, in a rapid time frame, but that's the compounding effect.
That's right. It's compounding, right?
Yeah. It's just like everything in the first 10 years felt slow.
Yep.
And I felt like it was a grind, and I felt like I should be further ahead in life. And I felt like I've dedicated my life to this. Like, why can't I be even further ahead? And then the last sort of 5 years, when all of these properties just kept growing and growing, and I kept buying more and more property, it all just compounded, it all snowballed. And the last sort of 5 years, it just went nuts. Like, I'm talking an average year for me can be $2 to $3 million in capital growth for me doing nothing.
Yeah. It's incredible.
So it's not hard to make $2 to $3 million if it's just natural growth.
Yeah. So when you think about wealth now, what does that actually mean to you?
Time. Wealth is time, because what people don't realize is wealth is to be able to do things on your own terms at your own time, right? It's not really a dollar figure, because everyone's dollar figure is different. So, whether you want a 100 grand passive income, $1 million passive income, it's irrelevant. It's like, are you doing what you want with your time, right? And if you are doing what you want with your time, then wealth, that is your wealth, right? Because you're choosing why you're doing something, when you want to do it and how you want to do it, and no one's dictating it for you. So that was something that I always chased, because there's a difference between rich and wealthy. Rich is an income, right? Rich is, I earn a really big income, but if I don't earn the big income, I will have no money. very quickly. That's a rich person. And you see those people are very stressed. And the reason they're stressed is because they've got so much money coming in, but it's only derived from them. And they then have a nice house, they have nice cars, they have nice things. But if they stop working, all of it goes away. For me, it was the other way around. I wanted to be wealthy, and wealthy takes a long time, decades, right? But wealth means that it's not fleeting. You can't lose it easily. You'd have to be pretty stupid to lose wealth, because you've built something for so long that it becomes long lasting, and it's giving you a lifestyle without, you know, losing any of that wealth. So a lot of rich people will trade time for money. A lot of wealthy people will get time because of their wealth.
Interesting.
And that's what I was always wanting. I want time because of my wealth. I don't want to trade my time for money to be rich.
Yeah, good. And how has your definition of success changed as the years have gone on and the business is built and your portfolio has grown?
I would say, I mean, like anyone that's young, my definition of success was a Lambo. My definition of success was showy. My definition of success was like, when am I going to have the nice watches and the nice clothes and, do the nice holidays and all that sort of thing. And I think that's all great to have, but that was sort of the definition of what I believe success was back then. But I think that's sort of anyone in their 20s. And also remember, I'm coming from nothing, so for me, the definition of success was what I saw other people as successful. Definition of success today is being able to provide for your family in any way without it taking away the time from your family. So like for me, it was like now it's like I can do just about 99% of things, and I don't have to like lose all of my time and energy and be away from my family to be able to provide those things. I could be at home 7 days a week and I can do that with them. That's the real definition of success to me.
Yeah, great. And I think the next question is a popular one. I mean, obviously you've got a great portfolio, 45, nearly $50 million. Like, how does that, how do you let that work for you? Do you invest, like, how much do you invest of that? Like, how much do you live off? How does that work? I think a lot of people would want to know ultimately how you do that.
So a lot of my portfolio has been building the assets on leverage, right? So getting more leverage. And I don't run huge leverage anymore, like I probably used to in the early days. Like in the early days, I would be leveraging up to sort of 80, 90% everything. These days, I sort of try to run my leverage almost to sort of 50% or lower, right? And the reason for that is as you build, for me anyway, as you build enough wealth, I don't want to have risk of losing what I've built. So there's no point in running high leverage at really, really big numbers. So for me, I run a little bit lower leverage. I always have, millions of dollars sitting in offsets accounts. I've got emergency funds upon emergency funds. I always make sure everything's very safe in what I do. Now, I could probably build this portfolio to 100 million, but the thing is with it is some people are doing it because of ego. I looked at it and thought to myself, does my life change if it goes from 45, 50 million to 100? No. So why are you in such a hurry to get there? Because if you are in such a hurry to get there, the chances are you'll, screw it up, you'll lose it. And whatever you build for 20 years is going to have to go back for square one and do it all over again. And your lifestyle's not going to change for it anyway. When you get enough money to the point where you can get the things that you want in life, incremental happiness slows down for the things that you buy, right? So for example, I was talking about this, I was at dinner with another guy who's quite successful, and I was sort of talking to him about it. I said, okay, let's say when I bought my Lamborghini, the first day I bought my Lamborghini was the happiest day I ever had, right? And the reason for it was not because I bought a Lamborghini, it was the symbol of I was only going to buy a Lamborghini when I felt like I was successful. So the meaning of success was behind the Lamborghini, right? Now, I could now sell that Lamborghini. It was $400,000. I could sell that Lamborghini and go buy $1.3 million SVJ, right? Yeah, that's an Aventador Lamborghini, right? For anyone that doesn't know. The happiness to go from that car to that car is 10%. And the reason for that is because what am I getting more? I'm getting a couple of extra cylinders and I'm getting more wow factor from other people. But if you aren't trying to validate yourself from external people, It really doesn't matter. So when I do things for me, and I get the most happiness out of that for me. But when you start to do it for other people, the incremental happiness goes down. So people will this is why I'm careful with building my portfolio. I need enough to be able to do all the things that I want to be able to do. Okay, I'm not going to own a private jet, if I'm on the trajectory that I am, but do I need one? No. Well, am I working that hard for that? No, because I don't need one. Okay, cool. I don't need it then. So when I'm building my portfolio, I want to build the portfolio in such a sustainable way that makes me happy rather than stressed. Now, in the early days, I was stressed, but I was pushing the envelope because I hadn't achieved the definition of what I thought was success. So I knew that time was money, and I knew that I needed to transfer my time into all of this activity to build as much money as I could to buy assets. But it gets to a point where I say, okay, now I don't need to do that anymore. Like, calm down and understand that you've gone so far. An extra 2 million in your bank account won't change anything. So be careful what you're trading for that money going forward. Now, in terms of I think the other sort of part of that question was, I guess, people want to understand like my cash flows and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's right.
So as I built my portfolio, because I was running higher leverage in the earlier days, as I kept building it up, I would always run this portfolio at neutral or negative, right? And the reason for that is if it turned positive cash flow, I haven't bought enough property. Because the way that I looked at it was, am I trying to retire off the cash flow 10 years ago?
Yep.
No. I'm trying to build wealth because I haven't acquired the net worth that I needed at that time to be able to get the things that I wanted. So I wanted a really nice house. I wanted, for me, I wanted a nice boat for my family. I wanted some half decent cars, nice holidays, a normal definition of successful life, right? So I was pushing my net worth to a point that I could achieve all of those things. And if I had to slow down because I wanted cash flow, the cash flow, I get $200 a week. What's it going to do?
Yeah.
It's going to change my life.
Nothing.
It's going to do nothing. Interest rates go up. Guess what? The $200 is gone.
Yeah.
So I knew that the interest rates would just change my cash flow position. I wasn't going to retire because of the cash flow at that point. But if I could double, triple, quadruple my net worth, now I'm starting to get somewhere, because once you have a big enough net worth, you can then do what you will with that, that net worth to be able to get what you want.
Yep.
You can then transfer it into the income. So I spent, the best part of 15 years really building net worth, and any time it went positive, I was like, buy another property, to the point where I think at my height, it sort of was negative, like $150,000 a year, my portfolio. And people would say, wow, how do you afford that? I used the equity from my property portfolio to cash flow it so that I could keep building. Because this is if I wanted to work it out from a math point of view, let's just say that I want a passive income of, let's say I have $2 million. Let's just say I have $2 million in cash. If I have $2 million in cash and I want a 6% return, I'm going to get $120,000 in passive income. Okay. For most people, I go like, oh, that's really good. To me, I was just like, no, that's not enough. Like 120 grand's not going to survive a whole family and live a good life. So if I have $2 million, I would say, well, 120 grand's not enough for me. So was the focus the 6% cash flow that I wanted, or was the focus that I needed to turn 2 million into 4 or 4 into 8? That was my focus, because 120 wasn't enough. So let's just say that I then used the 2 million and said, I don't want cash flow. I want the net worth. So I then turn around and say, okay, I only leverage the 2 million of cash. I'm going to go buy $10 million worth of real estate with it, right? I leverage it, say 5x, right?
Yep.
I go get $10 million worth of property. Let's say it grows on average by 7%. I make 700 grand a year in cash flow. Even if I lose 100, 200 grand in negative, costing me 100 to 200 grand a year, I'm now making $500,000 to $600,000 in net wealth accumulation that is not taxed. It's not taxed until it's realized.
Right.
My 120 grand passive income is taxed, and I'm still going to work. Right. So let's say that I'm at the peak of my career. I'm in my 30s. I got 120 grand passive income, but I'm also trying to work towards making a really good income as well, because it's not enough to retire on. Next minute, I'm getting taxed on all of this.
Yeah, that's right.
Whereas I'm building wealth in the background and it's no tax, accumulate, no tax. And then the time that I want to realize it, I'll be effective with my tax rates, which will be lower than an income tax rate. And I'll be able to build and go one property, next property, and I can leverage the equity without paying the taxes along the way, which means I can move a lot quicker, right? So my goal was I want to make the 500 or 600 grand a year in capital growth over 120 grand in cash flow, even if I had 2 million. So a lot of people are chasing cash flow because they don't like their life. They don't like their career. They are sick of working. But the reality of it is get used to it and find something you want to work in, or, change careers until you can get to that point where you're happy enough, and build your portfolio till you can get to a point where you can transfer it to passive. So I have lately, in the last maybe 2 years, transferred a lot more into cash flow, and weighted my portfolio out, with different types of assets to be able to then push my portfolio positive. So now my portfolio is positive in terms of cash flow, and it is paying me an income, but that's only probably been recently of last 12 months. And that's only because I now have chosen to do that. Because I now have realized, or not realized, but I'm now at a point in my strategy where I don't care about how many properties I have. I care about the quality of life I have and whether I can cover all my costs from a passive point of view. And I'm now at that point where I can. So that's why I've been transferring. But I wouldn't be transferring them into those cash flow type of assets early, because if I didn't have the net worth, it wouldn't have served me. So I waited for it got to a point where it's like, instead of me getting like capital growth, right? Let's say I leverage property. I might go buy, let's say I have $200,000 and I go buy an 800 grand property, and then the property grows in value 100 grand, 200 grand, 300 grand. The compounding effect on a cash on cash return, meaning the cash I put in versus the growth, that's like 40% cash on cash returns. Like I easily have worked it out where I'm getting 30, 40, 50%. And that compounding effect is actually growing, because as the assets get more and more highly priced, and they're still growing at say 6 or 7%, that's compounding. Why am I chasing 5 or 6% cash flow when I can get 40 or 50% compounding that I can then put into more and more assets? That's why I was like, it's too slow to get cash flow, and I need capital growth. But now I'm at the point where I don't need capital growth. So I'm going to get the cash flow, and then I'm just going to keep building up capital growth, cash flow, because $45, $50 million is still doing $3 million a year in capital growth. I don't need more.
It's not bad, is it?
Yeah, it's not too bad. It's not too bad.
The people that I do speak to, ultimately their goal is cash flow, right? But really the goal ultimately should be, first of all, is to build net worth, right? That's it. It's to build net worth. That's got to be first and foremost.
It's the goal, because if you speak to also most of those people, you do, but if you speak to most of those people, I can gather most of them have their own home. Right? They have a debt on their own home.
Correct.
Okay, so they want cash flow before they can even pay off their own home. So is it better to be able to create more net worth so that they can have the ability to pay off their own home? Of course it is. Why am I chasing cash flow? You're never getting cash flow if you haven't even paid off your own home, or you haven't paid off the debts that you got, right? So the first goal of it is, get your own home. If you are going that route, get your own home, and you buy assets to get enough capital growth to clean sweep the debt off if you want to, because that is where you're going to save the most money, because you're not paying taxes on saving interest, right? So, but if I'm earning interest, which I'm earning an income passively, I'm paying taxes on it. So you got to look at your age and say, why are you trying to achieve that at 25, 35, even 40? Why are you trying to achieve that? Especially when you got a debt on your own home. You aren't going to get a passive income high enough to be able to then go pay your own house off. It's going to take many years. I could probably clean sweep most houses in 5, 6, 7 years with just buying a couple of properties and getting really good capital growth. And it outweighs the passive income that people are taught to believe that that's what they need. I think it's just a lot of guru stuff where it's like sort of training people to try and buy properties for that reason, because it's an easy selling point for most people. Buy it for cash flow. Whereas for me, I just think if I can get cash flow, great, but I ain't going to sacrifice capital growth for cash flow. I want it to be the other way around. I'll sacrifice cash flow for capital growth, and I'll get further in life.
Yeah. So it's not about the weekly rent. It's about what that property can do for you long term, right?
Yeah, well, the weekly rent will increase. Let's say that I'm negative 2% per annum. Let's just say that I have a property and the rent is negative 2% on the purchase price. That 2% is what we call a break-even point. That means you're losing 2% net of the total purchase price every single year. The rent goes up, the break-even point drops over time. Interest rates fluctuate, the break-even point drops or it increases, right? If you are so caught up on just the cash flow, what you got to be careful of is you'll see things like interest rates going up, for example, and then you'll get shaken out of why you're investing. I go, this is my break-even point. Can I afford the break-even point? And is the capital growth outweighing that break-even point? And will that break-even point drop over time? And of course it will. Rents will go up. Hold it for 10 years, it'll be positive regardless. Doesn't matter how negative you are, it will be positive after a decade. But you've got to understand what you can tolerate in terms of cash flow, whether some people can't tolerate any negative cash flow. If that's the case, then you're going to probably have to go to more neutrally cash flow properties. But be careful, because if interest rates go up and they go negative, the mindset is stop investing. I don't want to invest anymore. No, can't we release emergency funds and have the emergency funds help pay for this portfolio for you? If you can do that, that's the best way to do it, because you're not going to get shaken out of investing. As interest rates rose over the last couple of years, that was the worst thing for a lot of investors, because they all stopped investing.
Yeah, got scared.
What happened to property? Went through the roof.
Yeah.
So property went through the roof. They stopped investing. Why? Because it cost them 10 grand a year to hold it. Okay, it cost you 10 or 20 grand a year to hold it. The house went up 150,000. Was it, now they look back, they're like, I wished I traded 20 grand for 150 grand.
You do that every day of the week, right?
Exactly. So I look at it and say, am I willing to do the trade?
Yep.
What's the break-even percentage and the likelihood that the capital growth on the long term will outweigh that break-even percentage?
Okay. Let's change gears here a little bit. So you focus on established homes, strong land value. Why is that your go-to strategy?
So established homes is because I like to buy, and land value property. When you're a developer, so I do a lot of developing a property as well. Personally, I just do a bit in the background. Let's say, as a developer, if I'm thinking of as a developer, I'm thinking to myself, I want to be able to create a product that I can sell for a profit, right? So if I go buy, 50% land value and then I go put the house on at 50%, I can sell the property, make a profit. But if I have a property and the land is worth 70% or 80%, it's very hard with that remaining 20 or 30% left to be able to whack a house on it. So what happens is the costs blow out as a developer to be able to replace the house. Because what happens is it's the land, like let's say a property's worth $800,000 in the area, but for me to replace the house and buy it and put a brand new house on it, it's 1.4 million. Well, I can do it, but I'm not going to go for a basic home. I want to go for more luxurious in terms of the house, because I'm trying to sway people to buy my house for 1.4 million over an existing property for 800,000, right? Like, why would I buy? And most people will go, well, it doesn't make sense to buy a house for 1.4 million. If I can buy the same house, it's older, I can renovate it, I'll buy the older house for 800. So now if somebody does build the $1.4 million house, it drags the $800,000 house up. So I don't have a threat of oversupply at that point. So I always look at it from a land point of view, just to say, just be careful with the oversupply of an area. You don't want to oversupply the area. The newer properties, is more threat of that, because if a developer could replace that asset 1,000 times, he will. And therefore there's 1,000 properties that come to market. That means there's more demand that needs to hit the market to be able to absorb the supply. But if I buy in a market where there's not as much supply coming on, I know that, okay, there's only so much supply. As long as the demand comes for this sort of product, this type of property, then the property will go up in value. So I do it from a safety point of view. Not to say you can't, make money off house and land packages. You definitely can, but there's a lot of risk and there's a lot of people that lose a lot of money as well. I never wanted to be that person. I also hold the property long term. So because I'm holding the property long term, if I was to build a brand new property, when's that property at its best? When I built it, brand new. So therefore, I'm relying on capital growth. The problem is the house is getting older over time and it's depreciating and getting worse. And then the land's appreciating. But if I was to buy a property in that same area as I just talked about the 800 grand property.
Yeah.
Let's say I wanted a house for 800 grand in there, brand new. I'm not getting a house on the same block size, brand new. I might get a townhouse for 800 grand, or I might get a really small house on a 250 square meter block or something really little. So therefore what's happening is I'm paying more for the dwelling and I'm paying less for the land, and it's just a percentage basis. If I look at it and say I paid 50% for the house, 50% for the land, 50% of my money's going up, 50% of my money's going down.
Yeah.
But if I buy 70% land, 70% of my money's going up, 30% of it's going down. If I buy an older house that I can renovate, guess what? The extra 30%, I can turn it also into a gain as well by renovating the property. So I can also add value to the property and make it better. So I typically focus on older houses, established areas, and houses I can add value to. But, or I sometimes do knockdown rebuilds and stuff like that as well. It's not something that I think most people should be doing because it costs a lot of money and it's not a guaranteed way of making money. But when you buy just bread and butter properties in good established markets that will just tick over and just keep growing in value, you can just do it one after another and keep building the portfolio, and it will ultimately get you to where you want to be.
Yeah. I get a lot of questions from people that are like, why do you buy established as opposed to house and land packages and so forth? And I think, from going through one of your courses, I think it sort of worked out to be that no matter, the lower maintenance cost, you might get a little bit more rent. And we're talking about the newer builds here. If you weigh it up, the value in the land of buying established property will outweigh that every time, including depreciation, the whole lot, right?
Yeah. And let's just say that you buy a 3-bedroom home, right? A 3-bedroom home to renovate might cost you 60 grand, 70 grand maybe to renovate most of that, right? Now you can make that house low maintenance anyway, and you can add value. So I'm hitting both. So when people say, oh, it's going to have more maintenance, well, good. We'll eventually renovate it. Now I don't have the maintenance on it because it's renovated. And I also increase the value because I renovated it. But when you buy a house that's brand new, there's nothing more you can do with that. It's at its peak, especially if you bought it, it's already done. There's all these development margins from the builders and the sales agents and all this stuff that's built into these properties that are brand new. And there's nothing I can do to increase the value. And then if more supply comes on exactly like mine, well, now all of a sudden I'm competing with supply as well. So competing with margins that are built into these properties. I'm competing with other people that are building properties, some more supply coming on. And I'm now just hoping that this market goes up a lot in value to capture the loss of depreciation of the building. It's the reason why government says we'll let you claim back depreciation on the building, because they understand that the building is deteriorating.
Right.
So I want to find properties that have deteriorated or like a balance in between, right? Now they don't have to be complete shit boxes, but like somewhere in between that, right? And something where I can add value, or just something that's just nice and original where I can acquire some really good land, in a good pocket. And I know that will always do well.
Yeah, okay, great. So I've got a question from one of your followers from Instagram. Now, this might be difficult considering the size of your portfolio today, but they would like to know what's the breakdown of established homes, units, developments, and commercial property?
Okay. It's hard because it moves. It's changing a lot. It's changing all the time. By the time this even comes out, it might have changed. But I would say that, I got my own home. My own home makes up sort of 6 to 7 million of that. I've got a lot of residential because that's where the bread and butter is. The residential is the bread and butter of building a portfolio with no risk. So most of it is sitting in there.
So can I just pause there? Is that because you're building your net worth? That's ultimately, that's it?
Yeah.
Are you focused on residential?
Because I'm building my net worth, and I'm now at a stage, which I talk about in my 6 Principles book and my 8 courses, is I'm now at the stage where I'm actually buying what I call burner properties.
Right.
So now I'm at the stage where I can afford to buy properties and just flip them every couple of years. So I'll just buy like a bunch of properties in an area that I think are going to grow in value, and within 2 to 3 years I'll just go back and sell them all over time, and then just free up the money, and that will reduce debt. So that's sort of what I've been doing with the residential side now.
Okay.
I'm still holding all of my residential. I'm just buying more so that I can retain as much of it, but also help pay down debt. In the last sort of 24 months, I've probably acquired about 15 million in commercial.
Right.
That's my changeover from my capital growth to passive. I've also been doing some developments with that sort of space. And again, a lot of that sort of space for me are buildings, between 2 to 5 million, sort of something, they're more expensive. I don't buy cheap commercial. I think that cheap commercial can get you into a lot of trouble. So for me, it's sort of freehold stuff that I own the land. And like I said, I buy sort of 2 to 5 million. And then I have developments, which are some of my older properties that I have held now for many years that have the ability to knock down because I bought a big block and I'm knocking them down and then building 2 houses. So I am doing a couple of those in Brisbane. Now I'm doing one at the moment where I'm turning 1 into 2. They're more luxury homes. And then I'm about to do that again. I wouldn't go down that path too much because the outlay is really, really high and it crushes your servicing. It's crushed my servicing. It's really hurt me.
Wow.
It's been good because I'm making money, but that's because I've held the property for a long time. But majority of the growth has actually been in the hold. Okay. I'm just holding the bread and butter property. Right. So I would much rather have held, let's say, for example, the development I'm doing in Brisbane right now is owing me about 2.7 to 2.8 million. I could have just turned around and gone and bought, 3 properties back in the day, 5 properties in the same area, done nothing, made more money, kept all 5 properties.
Interesting.
Whereas instead I'm doing a development and now I'm concentrating all that 2.8 million into 2 properties. I was just doing it for a bit of fun. I just thought it was something different. And I knew that I'd make a bit of money out of it at the end. So why not? So I wanted to create a product that looked good. It's something different. So I usually buy a lot of properties that don't look good, and I'm okay with that because they made me a lot of money. But I just wanted to do something that was a bit fun and a bit different for me. It'll make me, that one probably, I estimate will make me $1 million by the end of it. It's taken me many years and it's held me back a lot. That those 5 properties that I could have bought instead would have outpaced the $1 million. So I'm actually losing really. And a lot of developers actually lose trying to develop property even though they make a profit, right? Because what happens is they think they made a profit till they go buy the next property and realize everything went up in value. How much of the heavy lifting was in the development and how much was in the heavy lifting of the market moving while you did the development? And then what's the opportunity cost of how many years did you have to tie everything up where you couldn't do anything else? So I see a lot of developers, they don't do anything for 2 or 3 years, right? And I'm like, why? You're doing one development. Yeah, but I'm going to get this payout of 1 million, whatever. It's like, cool, it's 3 years, it's opportunity cost. You're going to have nothing at the end by the time you sell it. It's not repeatable, right? It's not easily repeatable. So I always just do things that I can repeat. And I like to hold my wealth for the long term because it's just compounding and it's money while I sleep and I don't have to do very much for it.
It's pretty straightforward, isn't it?
Makes it easy, yeah. Makes it easier.
What are your thoughts on rent vesting? Like, again, this was a question. It's popular. It's a popular term these days. You rent vested for what, a decade, and now you've got a beautiful home that you've bought. Like, explain that to me.
Rent vesting, I did a full podcast on this, but rent vesting is something that I have done personally. So 10 years I rent vested before I bought my own home. The reason for it is I lived in Sydney, could not afford my own home in Sydney for what I wanted. So therefore I wanted to buy as many investment properties as I possibly could for a long time until I got to a point where I could eventually afford my own home that I liked. Right. So I was just rent vesting, buying all over the countryside, acquiring my assets for 10 years before I did it. I think if anyone wants to rent vest, you want to go down the path for at least the medium term. So you probably want to do at least 5 years. 3 to 5 years is probably a minimum. 5 to 10 years is probably optimal for rent vesting because you want to be able to then acquire as many assets to then be able to compound and grow before you ever go back to your own home. I think that rent vesting is a very good idea for many that live in places where they live is expensive and they're not willing to forego where they live and they're going to stay living there regardless. They might as well put their money into assets while they rent vest and get ahead in life so that then eventually they can buy their own home. I did that. I lived in an area where I actually could have afforded my own home, but I wanted to rent vest because it was cheaper at the time to rent vest. You've got to work the numbers out though, because sometimes it's not cheaper to rent vest. And it depends on your, where you're at in your journey to whether it's worth it or not. Some clients have advised, don't do that. And some clients I'm like, it's all for you. That's what you need to do. So it really just depends. But rent vesting, I think, is going to become more of a strategy for young Australians because it'll almost be impossible to live in the cities that they live in for work and be able to invest. They may have to go invest regionally. They may have to invest in states that they don't live in, which is what most of our, a lot of our clientele will do. They'll invest in all different states. They'll invest regionally, capital cities, but different states. And they invest, even if they're in the same state, they'll just invest in something they don't want to live in. They're like, I don't want to live in that area. I don't think that's a good area. I've invested in areas where I'm like, I don't want to live there, but I can rent in a better area and do that. Where you got to be careful with rent investing is some people glorify rent investing as like, go buy these investment properties and then live in this really blue chip property. That's where it's not correct, because you crush your serviceability by having a huge rent. Like, the goal of rent vesting is sacrifice, right? The goal of rent vesting is I'm living cheaper than what it will cost me to own the property so I can buy more property. The goal is not to live the largest life possible, because then you can't go buy any property.
Yep.
So for most people, you want to rent vest for the reason that it is mathematically more beneficial in the short to medium term. And you want to rent vest because it's going to be the time that you do that, you're going to be acquiring more wealth in the assets that you're buying. You're not just like rent vesting, and you're not just having dead money by renting. So you've just got to weigh it up and say, is it the right thing for me? Am I happy to move around if I need to? And am I willing to sacrifice? And am I going to do it in the right way, which is rent cheaper than what you should do? But what most people do, rent cheaper so that they can then get their serviceability higher so they can buy more property, rather than thinking, I'm going to go rent this $2,000 a week home because I can afford it. But then all of a sudden they can only buy, one house or no houses. So yeah, it's a personal situation, but in terms of what's good for you, helped me for 10 years.
Yeah. I mean, we have a lot of people that come through that are rent vesting, like they tell me that, we can't buy in Sydney. That's where we live. That's where we grew up. We can't buy. And this is what our strategy is going to be. Now we're going to rent vest. We're going to invest, and we're ultimately going to build that net worth to be able to get that home where they want, when they want.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a good strategy.
Yeah. Okay. So Daniel, you're 35. You've got a $45 million property portfolio, soon to be $50 million. But right now the market is shifting again. Do you feel we're entering one of the biggest opportunities we've seen in years, or will most people miss it waiting for the right time? But don't answer that. We'll save that for the next episode.
Well, there you have it, guys. Another great podcast on the water, inspiring everyday Aussies to build wealth through property the right way so that you can make money while you sleep. If you're already on your property investing journey, or you are considering it, then YPYW specializes in building high-performance property portfolios backed by in-house research. We've helped clients create portfolios worth over $10 million, helping you exit the rat race. So just visit ypyw.com.au. Also, don't forget to grab a copy of our 6 Principles to Retire Younger and Richer. You can grab it on Amazon or our website. If you've got any feedback for the show, then you can reach out to us on Instagram, which is Your Property, Your Wealth, or my personal Instagram, DanielWalsh_YPYW. Well, that wraps it up for today's show. Thank you for tuning in, and I look forward to speaking with you next time on the Anchored in Property podcast. Bye for now.